Welcome back, gang. This is part 2 of our Chapter 10 lecture series for your textbook, Give Me Liberty by Dr. Eric Foner. This section is entitled Nationalism and Its Discontents. The focus question for this section is what efforts were made in this period to strengthen the economic integration of the nation, and what major crises hindered those efforts. James Monroe was elected president on a Democratic-Republican ticket in 1816. Now, Monroe was the last of those founding fathers to actually become president of the United States. And Monroe's election initiated a period of more or less virtual one-party rule in the United States. The Federalists, by this point, had pretty much vanished as a political force, and none won state or federal offices during this period, leading many to label this period as the era of good feelings, because supposedly the factionalism that had so highlighted particularly the 1790s between the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans had all but disappeared. But no party opposition led the Democratic Republican Party itself to devolve into factions mainly focused on sectional issues. And slavery emerged as the most problematic of those sectional issues that began to threaten national unity itself. Now, we must keep in mind, however, that particularly in this early stage here, slavery and the advocates for and against it were coming from it from more of an economic angle and argument rather than a moral issue. This idea of wage versus slave labor. Although the moral and ethical components were beginning to really bubble up into the conversation as well. During this period, beginning in the late 18-teens, a whole new generation of Democratic Republicans emerged onto the political scene in the United States. And this new generation of Democratic Republicans retained that belief in Jeffersonian agrarianism, but also insisted that agriculture must be complemented and reinforced by manufacturing and industry. Really a merging of parts of the old Democratic Republican and Federalist agendas there. And this led to the first federal government promoted and organized plan for economic development, known as the American System, which essentially had 3 central pillars. First, a new national bank that could promote economic prosperity throughout the nation and integrate the national economy. New tariffs to protect domestic manufacturing, and federal financing of canals and roads and other transportation systems known as internal improvements. The National Bank quickly became a target of public resentment. By this time, the charter for the first national bank, the first bank of the United States, put in place by Alexander Hamilton, had expired, and a new charter for a second bank of the United States had been issued. Now, like the first bank, this bank was a private, for-profit corporation that served as the government's financial agent. The bank was supposed to regulate the volume of paper money printed by private banks. Remember, private banks at the state and local level still printed their own monies at this time. The bank was also supposed to promote economic growth and overall integrate the national economy. Now, the National Bank also issued its own paper money that competed with the paper monies issued by state and private banks. Now, banks were only supposed to print banknotes equal to the amount of specie, hard currency like gold and silver, in its holdings. But banks generally often overlooked this little stipulation right there and printed far more money than they actually had in hard currency on hand, leading to rapid inflation and other issues as well. The Bank of the United States was also an investment bank as well as a commercial bank, and it participated in widespread land speculation during the 18 teens. However, in 1819, land prices plummeted and speculators, including the Bank of the United States, lost millions. Banks began to demand repayment of loans, and most people weren't unable to pay those loans back. As a result, economic recession ensued. Many farmers lost their land. Unemployment spread like wildfire through the urban areas. And this panic of 1819, as it was known, reinforced this inherent distrust of banks within American society, especially the Bank of the United States. And there was even legal challenges to the constitutionality of the Bank of the United States at this time. However, the Supreme Court ruled that the bank was valid. It was constitutional, breaking with a strict constructionist legal philosophy that only those things actually delineated and outlined in the Constitution was legal for the federal government to do. Sectionalism within the Democratic-Republican Party was fully revealed during the Missouri controversy of 1819 and 1820. In 1819, the territory of Missouri applied for statehood, and there was a proposal put forth in Congress to force Missouri to ban the importation of slaves and free slave children at age 25. Democratic Republicans split pretty much along sectional lines in the debate over this particular issue. There was a fear that adding Missouri as a free state would upset the balance of power in Congress between slave and free states, which the South feared could lead to the abolition of slavery if the free states got a majority in Congress. This also raised the issue of what to do about the westward expansion of slavery. How would that take place? What would that look like? Would slavery even continue to spread westward, or would it be halted at its current limits? These were all questions in the air at the time, and questions raised by this controversy. In 1820, a compromise was reached, known as the Missouri Compromise. Under this compromise, Missouri would enter as a slave state, and Maine would enter the Union as a free state. Before that, Maine was actually a part of Massachusetts at the time. It also established a line on the map that you see right here in this map there, that established that anything north of that line would be considered free territory, and anything south of that line would be considered slave territory. Of course, minus Missouri, which was technically above that Missouri Compromise line, but was allowed to have slavery under this compromise. And this, it hoped, would settle that controversy, but really all it did was kick the can down the road a little bit, and the controversy would soon reemerge, almost as vitriolic, if not even more so than before. Alright, gang, that concludes part 2 of our Chapter 10 lecture series. As always, study hard, and I'll see you soon.